Now, I had planned to do an educational video at some point about buy-to-let and how it works, because a lot of people come obviously to me as a mortgage broker for their, I don't know why, I'm not a very good one, but they do come to me and they talk to me and they want to buy some investment properties and stuff. And over the years, I mean, buy-to-let is a very good investment, or has been in the past. My dad started off in about 1967, 68 buying his houses, first houses in Bristol, you know, 250, 300 pounds for a house. And those same houses are now worth sort of £500,000. And of course, all the time he's owned them, he's earned rents. And so in my experience, I mean, I came up through that when I was a kid. I mean, once I got to sort of 6 or 7 years old, I was able to go along with him. All right, I couldn't do a lot, but I went along. Eventually, I started learning how to do the jobs, and then it became a point when I became actually handy at doing stuff. You know, I was able to put a wall up or whatever. Then he would get the people he was employing to do jobs to show me how they did it, in the hope that I'd learn how to do it. So he could stop paying them proper wages, you know, £100 a day or whatever they were being charged, and I'd do it as a kid for £5 a day and a fish and chips for lunch, which worked out quite well. I became a very good decorator at one point. You know, painting and decorating was my thing. I could do a whole flat in about 3 days, start to finish off the glossing at the end. So I've been in that line. When I became a financial advisor, the main reason I became a financial advisor, because of that background. I like dealing with houses, like housing transactions, wanted to be able to help with the business a little bit. So buy-to-let mortgage, up until that point, you really didn't get too many of them. You kind of just they were just mortgages or loans. They weren't specifically buy-to-let, but they came out in the mid-90s, and I sort of got involved at the early point. And people like Capital Home Loans, the mortgage business, they were the ones doing them at the time. There weren't many others. Chelsea Building Society launched a product after, I think it was 96, and they came, you know, so lenders started getting involved because they suddenly realised there's a good profit in this. The basic mantra behind buy-to-let is obviously you buy a property. The idea is that you borrow some money. Generally, you don't want to own that house at the end, so most landlords tend to have them on interest-only mortgages, whereby you borrow, say, £100,000. The idea is that you keep that property for a while, you earn your rent, you pay your bills, your mortgage and everything else, the mortgage interest. But then when you get to your 60s, 70s, you decide to retire. The idea was you sell the property, hopefully it's gone up in value as well, and you pay off the mortgage, whatever was left over, a bit of capital gains tax, and then the rest was yours, and you move forward, and all that time you've had a bit of an income. And that was what most people tended to do. Not everybody. Some people wanted to own them, or if maybe they wanted to get them early on and then later on let their kids go and live in them or take them over. So they might do those on capital repayment because they had a long-term plan to own the properties at the end. But in general, there wasn't many that was done on a repayment basis. The basic way of doing it was that the lenders looked upon it completely separate to your residential. So there was no income as such. Your income didn't come into it. If you had the deposit on a property, you could borrow £1 million if the rent was right. It was simple as that. That sounds crazy, but it does work. What they would do very simplistically is they say, okay, if you want to borrow £100,000, and this is assuming you've got a deposit in the property, obviously, but let's say you're borrowing £100,000, they say, right, in order to borrow £100,000, the rent must be equivalent to at least the interest-only payment on that mortgage with a margin, say 125% of the rent. So as long as your rent was £650 and the mortgage payment was no more than 500, you could borrow that £100,000. That's very simplistic. And it still remains today. Although the calculations have changed over the years, there's different tiers of calculations as well. Lenders nowadays will differentiate whether you're a high rate taxpayer or a lower rate taxpayer. If you're a standard rate taxpayer, then your interest calculation will be lower as a requirement than it would be if you're a higher rate taxpayer. And that's to take account of just making sure you've got enough disposable income. The idea being that they're going to ignore a buy-to-let for purposes of your own residential status, and therefore they want to make sure that you're making enough that every 3 or 4 months, ideally you've got kind of a month or so worth of rent in profit that can sit there and basically protect that mortgage. So if you had an empty month at some point where you weren't getting any rent, you still have profits within the business. It could cover that rent or cover the mortgage payment, and therefore the property was essentially quite a low risk investment. The main way people do it is you look at a property, you'll put down 25%. There are 20% mortgages available and 15% mortgages available even. But generally with buy-to-let, you want to start off you're borrowing 75% of the value of a property, so you're going to be putting in 25%. And then we then apply the stress test of the rent. So we'll say, okay, what's the rent going to be? £1,200. We'll work out that in order to borrow X pounds, the rent needs to be. As long as your rent is a higher figure than what it needs to be, you'll be okay with the 75%. Or if you were trying it, an 80% mortgage, if it fit, but that's where the problem comes in because the calculation is higher that you need. But assuming the rent's there, however, if let's say your rent was going to be 1,000 and you need it to be 1,200 to get to borrow the 150, say he wants to borrow, then the lender would say no, you can't borrow 150. Generally, they would restrict it. They say, well, actually, if your rent's only going to be 1,000, the most we can lend on 1,000 is £120,000. So you have to put the extra 30,000 in. Your deposit needs to be bigger. And that really catches some people out sometimes, or if a valuer goes out. Now, everyone has an opinion of what a rent's going to be. Now, if you're experienced, generally you can walk into a place and know that in a certain area, 2-bedroom flat is going to be worth £700 a month or £800 a month or whatever it might be. But if you try and buy something in an area you don't know, sometimes you can get it all wrong. You can sort of assume it's going to be an £800 rent, but in that area maybe you'll only get 650 or 600 or something like that. Or maybe you'll get 1,200. You didn't realise it. It can work both ways. But that's where a valuer works on behalf of the bank, because when they check what you're buying and make sure it's going to be legit, they're going to look at the value of what you're paying for the place or what you're valuing the place at. But they're also going to have that valuer investigate what are the rents around here. What are 2-bedroom flats renting for in this street, in the next street, in this area, to make sure you're not overstretching yourself. The idea is basically, because there's no reliance on your own income, it's designed to be a standalone transaction with the majority of lenders. There are some that do it based on incomes, but the majority are looking for it to be a standalone transaction. Even if they've got a minimum income you must be earning in order to qualify to get a buy-to-let, your income is set to one side. It's not looked at as being supporting that mortgage. It has to be supported by the rental calculation. And if it is, they'll lend you the money if your credit's good. If it doesn't support it, they'll expect you to put more money down to make it support it. The reason for the big deposit is generally just to say, well, look, if for some reason you didn't take to the rental game, didn't make any money, want to get out of it quickly or mess things up or something went wrong, you've put a sizable deposit into that property. The bank is unlikely to be losing. Even if you've got 6 months behind on your rent, on your mortgage payments, they're still going to be able to sell that property at auction and probably get their money back, and the fees are doing it. And the person who's going to lose out is you ain't going to get your deposit back, obviously. Your money's probably going to be the first amount lost. You can get, obviously, property crashes and property increases and stuff like that, and that will affect things. But in general, the risk is being taken by the person who's investing, and the bank are there to help you do it and just help you. Instead of buying, you need 200 grand and buy one house, you've got 200 grand, you might be able to buy 4 houses. But that's basically what we do. We assess the maximum loan that could be achieved based on the purchase price, but we're also double checking that against the rental calculations. A lot of lenders use very similar calculations, but they all do differ. So I will find in my dealings with people that I deal with the whole market, and there will be lenders that I know will be very much tighter on rental requirement than others. There's other lenders that offer specific products, and they say, look, on all of our products, we require the rent to be this high, but we've got this very special product, but it's a 5-year fix with a high fee or whatever. But if you want that product and your rent's low because you're expecting that area to be a growth area in the future, and you want to get in now when the rent's lower, you can use this product to get you into that property now. So there are all angles, which is why using a decent broker, whether it's me or anybody else, that's when you want to be using them. Now, taxation of let properties, you really need to be speaking to an accountant. I'm not a qualified accountant. I can give you very basic information, but I would always refer my clients. The same as with the legal side of things. There's a lot of things you take on when you're doing a job. You'll know from your own jobs that you pick up information of how to do something else that's, attached to your work, but you'll never be an expert in that side of things. And it's always best to refer people on to get expert advice, but you can give them a little bit of guidance. Say, look, I would check this or I would check that. The taxation of buy-to-lets is pretty straightforward. When you sell a property, you pay capital gains tax on the gain. You've got certain allowances that you're allowed to take out, but ultimately you have to pay some tax, and that tax gets changed on a reasonably regular basis. So like I say, an accountant will always know the most up-to-date information. My information sometimes is up to date, sometimes it's not, because I'm not doing the sell. I'm arranging a mortgage on a place. It's not my job to know the taxes, and I'd never assume it. Similarly on income, income tax is chargeable on anything you earn it from investments, as it is from your savings. Even at certain levels, once you get over a certain allowance, you must pay income tax. One thing that rental income doesn't attract is VAT, certainly on residential properties. On commercial properties it can be chargeable and it can be reclaimable, but on residential property, which is what my clients tend to come to me for, residential you don't get VAT. It's very, very, very rare you'd have a VAT registered business charging residential rates. They'd have to be set up in a specific way to do that, and most people aren't. You also, at the moment, you don't pay national insurance on the rental income. So you'll pay your basic rate of tax. So let's say the limit for higher rate tax where you go to 40% tax is say 50,000 a year. And if you're earning 45,000 but you now take on a rental property and you earn 10,000 net from that rental business, sort of after your business expenses, you've got £10,000. £5,000 of that is taxable at 20%, same with everything else in your income. But the bit that goes over the 50,000 is now chargeable at 40%. So you've got to remember that it's no different to having a taxable income. It's just that you don't pay national insurance on your rental income. Now, a few years ago, there was a housing crisis and people were struggling to get rent. So they thought, what a good idea. We need to change things. We've had a good idea. What we're going to do is everybody's moaning about high rents and not being able to get a place because there's high rents and all that. What can we do to improve the situation? I know what we'll do. We'll make landlords pay tax even on the interest payments that they're making on their loans. Now, previously, you didn't pay any tax on that. That was a total 100% relief. So if your rent was £1,000 a month coming in, £1,000, you take out the 500 quid of your mortgage, you only got taxed on the 500 quid that was left over after your mortgage and your expenses of running the business, like buildings insurance and bits and pieces. And that was how you'd run a business. Because if I was selling Mars bars in a shop and I sold 100 grand worth of Mars bars this year, but it cost me £25,000 to have the shop, the rent, the business rates and everything else, I didn't make 100 grand on Mars bars. I actually made 75 grand because it cost me 25 grand to be in business. So I get taxed on 75 grand. Leave out the VAT, all right? I know there's VAT on the food, but let's ignore VAT for the moment. But you'd be taxed on the 75 grand what's left. Unfortunately, with investment properties, they decided against that. They're not going to do that anymore. So they're going to make landlords pay tax on the interest due on the loans they've taken out to make the investment, which means that landlords' tax bills went up. Now, shockingly, what that did was landlords decided, hold on a minute, I've got to pay extra rent, extra tax, have I? Oh. Well, the rents are going up then. So, funnily, the rents, instead of the rents being forced downwards like it was expected, because any economist knows if you put someone's costs up, they always pass on that as a saving to people that are using their services. It's politicians 101, surely, that you always pass on your losses as a gain for someone else. So no, landlords obviously put the rents up. So rents soared again, the problem became worse, and that's it. Now what it's looking like is that Labour are looking for some ways of eradicating this £50 billion black hole they've created by spending their money on Islamic migrants and everything else that they've got. So that's you know what they're essentially trying to do. They couldn't manage to piss up in a brewery neighbour, could they? Let's face it. So they got 50 billion. They got to find 50 billion. They want to get some tax. And of course, so the obvious place is, well, landlords, they could pay more tax. So what they've decided to do is they're looking at a multitude of options. A couple I can think of. They're looking at property taxes, charging you for owning your own home, property taxes just for owning it. They've got a system like that in America, but it's quite low cost in most places, but it does get abused. It turns into almost a local income tax sometimes, because it's very much state and city decided over there. That can be dangerous in this country. Another way they're looking at is making landlords pay national insurance on their unearned income, which is what rental income is. It's deemed to be unearned income because it's income generated by an investment asset, the house. They want us to pay national insurance on it, which you've got to put taxes up on the first 40 grand of your wages by nearly 15%. So that's going to be a problem. Even for the self-employed, it's going to be 9%. So what they reckon that's going to do, well, first thing it's going to do, obviously, is most landlords are going to sit down and say, well, I earn 100 grand at the moment. My expenses that my lifestyle is dictated by that 100 grand. So I still need to spend 100 grand, but I'm going to have a 10 grand extra tax. Right, my rent's got to go up by 10 grand then to cover this extra, because I still need to be taking in 100 grand after the expenses. So the rent's just going to go up by about 10%. So everybody's rent's going to go up. And of course, we live in a country where there ain't enough property out there. There's not enough property for all the people who want to rent. So guess what? If you can't afford your rent, you're not going to turn around to the landlord and say, I can't afford that, I ain't paying it. They'll go, okay, here's your notice. I'm renting to someone else. And there'll be someone else who'll come and say, oh, I've chuffed a bit off. I've been looking for a place for months. God, thank God for that. I can buy it. Of course I'll pay that. That's all right. And those people are going to take their property on. And you're going to have an overload of people that are now unrentable. They're going to have to move in with mum and dad or go on the street or something like that. The more sinister thing is, obviously, the political climate at the moment is that we have mass immigration across the whole of the West, not just Britain. The EU is completely crippled by it as well. You've got African and Asian migrants coming in from all the Islamic countries. What surprises me about that is, look, if you're a practicing Muslim, why are you moving to Christian countries? I never understood that, because that's a bit like, in Ireland, Protestants moving into Catholic areas. It didn't happen because you didn't get along with the Catholics you were going to move in with. And so they didn't do it because it caused obvious problems. And this seems to be causing obvious problems. There's a difference in the cultures. There's a difference in the way people are brought up, and Sharia law is totally at odds with what is effectively a Christian sort of derived law status here. The two don't mix. And normally when you're a guest in someone's country, if you walk in and you say, I want to be a guest, what's the law? And they tell you, they say, oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. We do it this way, we do it that way. You're supposed to say as a guest, you're really supposed to say, oh, right. Well, that's very different to what I'm used to, but I'm going to comply because I'm a guest in your country. So I'm going to follow along with you. So if I went to Saudi Arabia and they said, look, if you shoplift, we're going to chop your hands off, I would say, well, I'll probably not go shoplifting then, because I don't really want to lose my hands. And if I got caught shoplifting and they said, we're going to chop your hands off, I ain't really got a leg to stand on. Well, I wouldn't have any hands to play with, put it that way. Because I've obviously broken their laws, and their law stands. I can't say, well, look, hold on a minute. Oh, Keir Starmer says you can't do that. Keir Starmer says over my country, you just get a slap on the wrist. They say, yeah, tough shit, we're in Saudi Arabia now, put your hands out. And you're gone. So we've got a problem at the moment where we've got a lot of illegal immigration. Now, that's not for me to discuss really in a way. I suppose you've got to be careful these days as well, because we ain't got free speech. We've only got, well, we got free speech. You just ain't got the freedom after your speech, because they send the old armed police to arrest you when you get off your plane, as they found it today. But we've got all these people that got nowhere to live. They've now got a problem whereby there are councils that are starting to look at trying to get the hotels closed down because they're getting flack from their own constituents who pay their council tax saying, look, we didn't ask for this. We didn't ask for 40 or 50 military age geezers to turn up and live in that hotel. And by the way, they're hanging around outside my door at school, primary school. After they come out, they're watching the girls go home. They're having problems because the facts bear it out. The actual facts from the government themselves point out that crime is on the up, and that upward spike of crime is caused in a roundabout way, is caused amongst the immigrant community. It's not a British culture thing that's changing so much. That's staying pretty much the same. But the uptick in crimes is being caused by that part of the community. Now, that might be because they're upset or depressed or whatever. Well, so what? They're still doing it. It doesn't matter why. They're doing it. And then that should be addressed by the police, who are completely toothless. And obviously they're not doing their job. But what it does, it gives government an issue. And this is where I think they've got a double-edged sword with buy-to-let. You've got to be very careful with buy-to-let at the moment, because I believe, and I'm in the industry, and I'm doing buy-to-let mortgages, but I believe what they are doing is they are pushing as hard as they can. They're going to load up buy-to-let with the tax change in the budget. You watch, they'll attack buy-to-let quite aggressively. The reason behind it is that some landlords will soak it up and carry on. They'll have the wherewithal to do it, but it might put them off, and maybe the next time round they'll pull out. But you will get smaller landlords, one or two properties, saying, look, is it ever worth the aggro? I don't want to be dealing. If I got to give away another 10% of my rents, I don't know if my tenants are going to pay it. I'm not confident. I'll sell the house. Or if they put on, extra taxes when you sell your house. So I'll sell it now before the rules come in. We've got to pay double double capital gains tax or something like that. I'll sell it now out the way. What they then do, they think they're going to be able to buy these properties up cheap. And then they're going to have places to put the illegal immigrants that maybe are going to be prevented from going in these hotels and other accommodation that they're getting kickback on. That's going to then have people moving into accommodation next to you. Now, are you going to be happy with that? If a landlord decides to sell to the government or rent to the government his buy-to-let property that's next door to you, how happy are you going to be with that? Is buy-to-let going to be as attractive an investment for people if they have to do that? Because most people don't go through life looking for a row. It's going to cause some. It's going to cause some. There are some people that are going to be very, very upset and very, very angry when their next door neighbour decides, I'm going to let Abdul and his mates live in that house because the government have just offered me 25% extra rent. They're going to cover any damages. They're going to give me a 5-year contract. I can sit back on the beach and watch the money come in, and I'll have the house back in 5 years. Well, you want it back in 5 years, because if you're doing it, you're guaranteed there's other people doing it. That whole street is going to have a number of properties in there. That street, if you look back to the history of social housing in this country, they started bringing out more rules in the 2000s where every builder, if they wanted to build a development, they say, oh, we want to put down 50 houses. You're desperate for us to put 50 houses in. We'll build 50. Can we have planning permission? The government would say, oh, well, you can, but for every 4 that you build for private people, you've got to build 1 and give it to us for the council for social housing. Now, nothing wrong with that. That was a deal they did. And at one point, they used to actually sort of put a corner of the plot that was social housing. Then they changed the rules that it's got to be integrated amongst the rest. I'm not such a fan of that, because I think that creates jealousy from the people that are renting those properties, who are not necessarily on the best of incomes, and suddenly they're living next door to people with BMWs and God knows what. But each to their own. But what it did do, you had these properties, these lovely estates would be built, and they all look fantastic. They're all brand new houses, so they all look fantastic. You go and live in any one of them. Wouldn't matter if it was the social housing one or the private one, because they all look identical. They're all nice. They're all beautiful. They all got the same fixtures and fittings. The only difference is whether you own it or you rent it. But if you go back to these places 5 years down the line, typically you would generally be able to tell which of the properties, which of the streets maybe, were devoted to social housing or had a high concentration of social housing, which ones didn't. Because the people who are renting the properties can't necessarily afford to look after their houses and don't have an interest to, because it's not their house, they're just renting. So they're not going to paint the windows every couple of years and change the carpets every couple of years or do new stuff or cobble the driveway or whatever, all the things people do when it's their house, put a little fence round, plant little trees or whatever. When you rent, you don't bother with that. It's not your place. Why would you bother improving it? You're just going to live in it, use it. If the landlord wants to turn up and do something to it, great, that's up to him. But you're not going to do it yourself out your own pocket. And that's what will happen if there's a high concentration of private rentals that go into the hands of the government for social housing. They'll start handing it out to people who aren't going to look after it, haven't got the wherewithal to look after it, no requirement to look after it. Those houses will start to look a little bit more ragged compared to the private ones in that street. And what will happen is the people in that street, when they want to try and sell, will find that people don't necessarily want to buy so quickly. People won't buy. People will be put off. And now, if your house is, if you've got a 3-bedroom semi in one street compared to a 3-bedroom semi in the other street, you're not going to get the same money as the guy in the next street. It might be identical house, but if he doesn't live next door to a social house, he's going to get better money than you, if you even sell. Because best will in the world, human beings are snobs. We all like to live next door to people we like, or that we can get along with, people that we affiliate, we like to have an affinity to. We like to, I feel I'm like a bit of a yuppie, I want to live next to other yuppies. Nobody, you can't help it. It's human nature. There's nothing wrong with it. It's human nature. In my experience, I've got clients of all levels, and there's no difference deep down in us all. But the one thing is that human nature is that you kind of gravitate towards people of your similar group. Just one of those things, isn't it? You only got to look at New York and in the turn of the century when they had lots of immigration coming in. The groups could have lived anywhere in New York, but you had little Chinatown, you had little Italy, you had the little Indian area, you had a Jewish area, part of town. The people kind of affiliated with each other and stayed together. And that was a more extreme version, I suppose, but at the end of the day, that's what happens. People do. So if they start attacking buy-to-let in that way, it could be the death knell for the market, because you cannot tax people into oblivion and expect them to keep going. You don't go into buy-to-let investing your money. You can invest your money anywhere. You can invest in Bitcoin. You can invest it in stocks and shares or a holiday home somewhere. You don't have to supply a private rental accommodation for someone to come and live in it. I mean, sometimes my dad's been lucky. Most of his tenants have been brilliant. I mean, I got on pretty much with most of them. There have been one or two occasions I could tell those stories, but probably get myself arrested. But it's going back a long time. I'm sure I'll have to look at the statute of limitations for what I can get away with telling you about things like that. But at the end of the day, you're going to invest in the property. You want to rent it to someone like-minded who's going to look after it, who's going to pay the rent, who's not going to argue too much. You don't really want them on the phone to change a light bulb, but equally you don't mind them being on the phone if the window falls out. Because, I mean, I've seen both extremes. I've seen tenants that want you to go round there because they drop their bloody soap and they think it's your problem because you're the landlord and they think they're paying enough that you should go round there and retrieve the soap from under the bloody sink or something. But I've also had tenants who the heating's gone out, but they said, I could be arsed to ring you, so I left it. And the house now got condensation and damp because they just forgot to tell you the heating had been out for a month or two during the winter. And it's the two extremes. But at the end of the day, it's your investment. You want a decent return. You want to earn a few quid out of it, pay your taxes and get on with it. You don't want the aggro. You don't want Rachel Reeves dipping around in your back pocket every couple of minutes. You certainly don't want to be spending money to let someone live in a house, because that's not on. You're there to make a profit. That's where the difficulty is for the business in the future, I think, is what happens in this budget. And that could spell a problem for the housing market in general, because yeah, there'll be a few more houses will come on the market. I'm not quite I'm not convinced that it'll be first time buyers that will benefit from that. I got a feeling it'll be investment people who buy them up to turn them into social housing, and that will be a much, much, much bigger problem for this country, and it'll add to the general dissatisfaction. It seems to be just spreading. I mean, I don't think I got a single client that hasn't talked to me about politics and things in the last year, I suppose, and it's crazy because like it hasn't really got anything to do with what I'm doing, or you like to think it, but it really does have a massive effect. You've got to think about it. But there we go. Bites that in a nutshell, and then a whole boring bit about politics. Please like, share, and subscribe if you don't mind. It'd be fantastic. Thank you very much.